Well, hello, Aaron.
Hello.
Wow.
Yeah,
I can.
that's a silly thing. That's a silly thing that was happening. We made it stop.
We did make it stop.
Allegedly. There we go. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's still doing it.
Do you think so?
I do. I
That's
do.
amazing. That's
Hi,
super
everyone,
cool.
and welcome to a very special Saturday morning Dreamland
Dreamland podcast,
Dreamland
starring
podcast.
starring our technical issues. Thank you,
Technical
ladies and
issues
gentlemen.
as per usual.
Ones that I introduced 7 seconds before the show started. Always the best kind, the kind that you didn't intend.
That's right. We like to keep it,
Keep us on our
tip.
toes.
Oh, jinx.
Yeah.
So how are you doing this morning, Aaron? How early is it here? Whoa. Clearly it's very early and I haven't finished my coffee.
It is according to space time about 10:31 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. The weather outside looks like we might get a little rain later on, so be sure and bring your raincoats and or umbrellas out with you if you go out into the world today, kids.
Weather on the 10s and 2s, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right. I have no idea if it's going to be severe because we don't have fancy radar here. We just sort of look at the sky and go, starting to feel like rain.
Yeah. So today we are going to be talking about. Did I do the thing? Did I actually say the thing? Welcome to Dreamland, the Retroblasting podcast.
You did.
My name is Melinda.
My name's Aaron.
And today we are going to be talking about Howard the Duck. The duck, the myth, the legend.
The movie that I had almost completely forgotten about until we sat down to prepare for the show.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I kind of wish I still had that luxury.
That's right. There are no luxuries anymore.
Man.
I want to just really quickly say that we do have monetization on, meaning that in the comments you can do super chats and things like that, but just understand that we won't be reading them until the very end because we're also recording this for the actual podcast, and so I won't be able to go through my notes while reading all of your comments, but we do value your comments and your hot takes. So please feel free to send us messages, and we have our wonderful crew pulling aside noteworthy comments that we will read at the end. So you'll have to stick around to the end and we will address your chats. All right, so now that business is out of the way, let's get started.
Okay.
Let's settle into a nice cup of podcast.
Oh my gosh. Did we ever establish what the proper ingredients for a cup of podcast were? I know it was high school, college.
High school, college is
a
important.
dollop of that.
Yeah.
And a little bit of Red Bull, ladies and gentlemen.
And coffee with Red Bull.
Just pour it.
Just
right
caffeine right into the veins.
It's horrible. It's the worst idea I've heard all day.
Okay, so getting started, I do want to give, I am not the biggest comic book expert, but I feel like we have to kind of set the stage for Howard. So before we can get to the movie, we really kind of need to lay the groundwork.
Okay.
You got to lay your foundation, as my English teacher used to say. So
why did they stop saying it?
He died. Bringing it back to murder, although it wasn't murder. So.
Wow, I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
Comedy's a risk, folks.
So my reference for this is a very wonderful blog written by R.S. Martin called All Quacked Up. So if you want to read very in-depth, very well done research, I mean, this guy, I can't say enough about the quality of his research. He really goes into a lot of what I'm about to talk about in way more depth than I'm going to. So
that is one of the things that stood out to me watching the movie again, was that there were layers to it. Like there were things you could keep scratching and finding more about. There's tons of questions about why certain things were in the movie. There was endless like self-referential things, just sort of like Easter eggs all throughout the movie, like on the posters and on the books. Yeah, don't feed Howard the Duck an egg. That's a bad choice.
All right, so going back to the 70s, the wonderful 70s, Steve Gerber was an ad copywriter in St. Louis back in 1972 when he reached out to a friend who worked at Marvel Wouldn't it be great to have a friend that worked at Marvel? And who helped him get a job as an editorial assistant. And then he later started doing some freelance script work, which apparently was pretty common, a common pathway for guys to move up through the ranks.
Just like work for hire stuff.
Yeah, I guess. So the Man Thing feature was Gerber's very first series assignment. And real quick, I want to give a shout out to Mike Alonso, who also helped me find that R.S. Martin's blog and gave me a lot of great background information because he actually read Howard the Duck's comic back in the 70s when it was out. So just a little shout out to him. So Clobbering Times, really great work there. So it was in the Man Thing feature where Steve Gerber first mentioned Howard the Duck. And so I'm going to show you real quickly. There on the side is Steve Gerber. And I think that must be sometime in the 70s with that coat. Could be early 80s. And there is Howard's first appearance. And so you can kind of see what he looked like. He's got his little coat and tie and a little hat. And he's Howard. So it was from Adventure into Fear, number 19. So Steve and there was an artist named Val Merrick who created this extraterrestrial duck. And Steve conceptualized him as kind of like a sight gag. And then Val added in the cigar and the clothing and that sort of thing. So it sort of really gave between
Those
the two of them.
Those details really make Howard for me. The fact that he's kind of got a familiar milieu, like just in the face and his structure, but then he's got that sort of noir, sort of 80s stock market trading, wisecracking kind of thing that just doesn't really, it's weird how well it meshed with the character of Howard the Duck.
Yeah. So really soon after he showed up, his character appeared to die by falling from a stepping stone bridge into oblivion.
I like happens, it almost happened to me this morning. I tripped over a belt and almost fell into oblivion.
Yeah.
It was very scary.
So, but people really loved this little guy, and they started haranguing the powers that be over at Marvel, including at like San Diego Comic-Con. They were like, irritating the crap out of Stan Lee, going, where is he? We really want him back. And someone supposedly sent a dead duck to the...
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just going to change people's hearts and minds, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it did. So basically he was reintroduced in I jumped the gun on this slide, but this is him reappearing in Giant Size Man Thing number 4. And Aaron, this is kind of like the thing that you talked about. He was falling forever. So basically he had fallen from that thing.
Thanks for bringing it back to a primal fear. I mean, it's not quite Jupiter, but it's the other one.
Well, he's kind of falling past Jupiter, looks like
nonstop,
in this image. But yeah, he sort of falls through everything, and he finally lands in Cleveland, and he has several adventures there, leading to him eventually getting his own comic very soon thereafter. So a lot of the plot that's sort of described there is sort of lifted and put in the movie, obviously. So he falls. He doesn't start out on Duck World because that came later. From a different writer, but the whole falling through space and landing on Earth and landing in Cleveland is definitely from that.
I keep asking myself, why Cleveland?
I think there's just something funny about the word Cleveland, honestly.
the land divided.
So slide 3. So published in 1976, Ed Schuken, who was the Marvel circulation director, had very little faith in Howard. So this was his first solo comic. And so Ed Schuken ordered the very minimum print run for a standard sized color comic, and it immediately sold out, partially due to collectible dealers like Jim Kovacs snapping them all up. And he literally said in an interview that he followed around the distributor's truck as it was making deliveries and bought 900 issues.
That's insane.
And then he marked them up from a cover price of 25 cents to $12.50, which is about a 5,000% markup, and sold them all. And so...
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, seriously. So Marvel then soon thereafter had to run a treasury edition that basically reprinted the first issue story and some of his prior appearances so that people could know who this character is, because obviously if you can't get the first issue, then you're missing the literal introduction of who is this character and why am I continuing to read it. So Howard's big selling point and sort of his take, just to give you an idea of what he was like if you've never read the comic, was he's an alien. And so he is sort of that fish out of water type character. And he sees the absurdity of our world and he doesn't really make any attempt at all to disguise his reactions to the things that he's seeing. And so this
So
allowed,
he's like a mirror that we can look at and have
yeah,
commentary about what's going on.
social satire was heavy in this and social commentary. And so they even ended up doing a Howard for President campaign in 1976. They sort of did like the buttons for, you know, for the big presidential election. And
That's ringing a bell, like that I've seen like in just people's stuff.
yeah. So this next part is not going to surprise you at all and shouldn't surprise anyone in the audience. So in 1977, Disney contacted Marvel because Howard looked a whole lot like Donald Duck.
You can't not see that when you look at him hand
Yeah.
drawn on the page. It's
Yeah.
just like, this is a wisecracking Donald.
Now, in that blog, that R.S. Martin blog that I told you about, there is an interesting thing that he brings up, and it's just allegedly, I don't know if this is true, but it says that in countries where comics are translated into languages other than English, the word duck has basically become synonymous with Donald Duck. I guess
Oh.
because it's so pervasive there and has been for more than 40 years. So just because the word duck is in Howard's name, no, he became what no comics character had been before, which was a threat to Donald Duck. And so those overseas licensees started complaining to Disney, who then contacted Marvel. And so that started this whole thing. And so
the irony of that is not lost on me. With Disney owning Marvel now, it's so weird to think that
it's funny,
you look
right?
back in time and you see all these conflicts.
Yeah. So basically the eventual outcome, and again, read the blog if you're interested in all the nitty gritty details, but basically Howard was mandated that he had to wear pants. And so
even in the movie, he always had, like, at the very least, boxers on.
That's right. And there's that's why is they were trying to avoid the ire of Disney.
And they didn't have a problem showing duck genitalia. I'll tell you that right now. This is just haunting. Yeah.
So Steve Gerber made, and this is very Steve. So Steve and Howard's kind of just an extension of Steve's own personality, is what I am taking from all the things I've read about him.
I was noticing that too. You know, when you get bio from Howard, you hear things that you would expect Steve to have said. Even like when you gave me the background a little bit on how Steve got his job and how he got started and everything, it sounds exactly like what Howard was talking about.
Yeah. Well, so Steve kind of turned it into, they were like, well, you have to put him in pants. And so Steve wrote this whole thing into the comic book about how Howard was kidnapped and forced into these horrible clothes. And he finally escapes from these people who were like, you know, basically doing weird things to him and putting him in these weird, tight, horrible clothes. And he sheds them all by the end of the issue. And Steve just goes right back to having him without pants.
So
and
pants is a story arc.
He basically just, he sort of skewered Disney
and said no.
And again, you got to read about it. It's really funny. I don't have time to go into it.
Well, if you think about Howard's character, he wouldn't give in. He wouldn't capitulate to having to wear pants. Like, you know, you said earlier, he doesn't make efforts to blend in with society. So why would he wear pants because some corporation wanted him to? Well,
he's not going to wear pants, and Steve's not going to put him in pants.
Do you think Steve wore pants?
I don't know.
I mean,
he seems like the kind of guy that just did whatever the heck he wanted to do.
You said it was self-descriptive, so maybe he was sitting there just, you know.
Maybe he didn't want to wear pants.
Maybe not. Maybe
I mean, a lot of people during the, you know, COVID times have stopped wearing pants.
Really?
By all accounts.
See, I don't want to know that.
I don't either, but.
I don't know.
So in 1978, Steve Gerber was fired from Marvel. Again, if you want to know all the gory details, of which there are a lot, please go to the R.S. Martin blog. Other people then tried to take on the character, but it just flopped because
Steve is the spirit of Howard.
Steve is the spirit of Howard. My God. Do you want to try that again?
Steve. I'm just having Claudia with a chance of meatballs flashbacks. Steve was the spirit of Howard.
Yes. So
not the university, but the duck.
Right.
Just being clear.
So in 1980, Marvel and another production company began working on a radio serial, which would star Jim Belushi as Howard.
That's
And
a great catch right there.
They planned to have it go out to different rock stations, which is kind of an interesting idea. Like I'm trying to envision how that would have gone over, but okay.
When was this again?
1980.
Okay.
So they Marvel also started work on a Howard the Duck animated TV series proposal.
Ooh, I feel like some Garbage Pail Kids potential
There's
here.
a lot of weird overlaps, and I really was like, God, we're doing yet another Alien with lawsuits.
Yes.
And there's just a lot of, and same with the Aliens episode before that, the Alien Autopsy. I'm like, I promise we're not going all aliens.
Why not? We can just be crazy. Talk about alien abductions now. Welcome to the Alien Abduction Podcast show.
All right. So moving into the film. So we're kind of caught up to back in the 70s, George Lucas was looking for laughs because he was a little stressed out.
He was all out of them.
He was,
he's very serious. He's
dealing with the first Star Wars movie and then, the production of Empire and stuff like that. And so he thought that Howard the Duck was a hilarious comic. He really loved, I don't know what it was about it. I would love to know what he thought was so great about it. But not that I think it's great, but I'm just trying to figure out what George thought was great. And
I think he was just a fan. Like he was a fan of Flash Gordon, I think. And if you look at the artistic style, it was a similar sort of color scheme and line drawing style.
So you think it was just like
it was in his wheelhouse.
So it wasn't the depth of Howard, it was the surface of Howard.
I'm sadly discovering as time goes on that depth is not one of the attributes that I think George Lucas sees first when he's looking at a fictional property. We apply a lot of depth to his other work. And I think a lot of other writers, you look at Empire and you look at how much of that was amplified by the other writers.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that can be added to his stuff. But if you really get down to the core of it, it's always very cut and dry, it seems like. He's just got very simple movements for each plot point to plot point. So I think I think he genuinely just thought Howard was funny, and he thought his satire was cutting and clever, and that was enough for him to say, hey, we should try to approach this as a movie.
Yeah. Well, so George talked with his American Graffiti co-creators, Willard Huyck, which looks like Huyck, but it's Huyck, and Gloria Katz, who were a married couple, and they worked with him, like I said, on American Graffiti. And they initially, as a group, sort of envisioned this being an animated film. But by the time they got the licensing agreement in 84, they started production in 85, and it was released in 86. So by the time they got the wheels in motion, Universal Studios really wanted to release that summer of 86. So they did not have time to do an animated.
Do the hand animated
exactly.
Back and forth.
Yeah. And so they basically determined that they'd have to go with live action and use a costume for Howard, which was a weird choice because, in my opinion, one of the reasons that this doesn't work is because he looks like Macaulay Culkin.
Oh my gosh, you stole my joke. I was so ready to just spring that. Okay, so I'm actually glad that you stole the joke because I thought maybe it was just me. But I wanted to go into Photoshop and actually take the Home Alone.
I did it. It's on the screen right now, Aaron. Don't be mad.
I'm not mad. I'm so very proud of you.
He's mad.
Can you just tell?
He's super mad.
No.
Actually, I want to thank Michael. He actually photoshopped this for me, but it was funny because Michael was sitting watching the movie with me.
You can't not see it.
And I was looking at it going, God, he looks like Macaulay Culkin. But I didn't say it out loud. Michael goes, oh my God. Like maybe 20 minutes after I was thinking it, he was like, he looks like Macaulay Culkin. I was like, oh my God.
There's probably tens of people out there who are thinking, of course, I thought that he looked like Macaulay Culkin.
That's right.
Very sophisticated 10 people. But of course.
So I found some quotes from some of the folks who worked on the movie. So Gloria Katz said, we didn't have enough time. You wait for these executives to read the script, and every week that goes by will cost more in the long run. So we were finally given a go in May of 85, and the duck had not been built.
What?
We had
between May of 85 and then the launch in 86.
Yeah, they had to start shooting in October. So basically you've got from May to October to start shooting for a summer release. It was a very tight schedule for that kind of production. So that gives you an idea of the kind of constraints that the team was under. Willard Hike says this. He says, "We went to very serious legal meetings at Disney about whether Howard the Duck was stealing his look from Donald Duck." So it's coming back around again because of this movie. "We put our models on the conference tables, and all these lawyers would look at them and they'd say, 'Well, it still looks like Donald.' And we'd say, 'Well, they're wearing different clothes.' And they'd say, 'Can the bill be a little flatter or a little thicker?' They really got into it. So we had to keep redesigning the duck." And so you know what it's like when you get a bunch of executives in trying to mess with artistic stuff and, "Well, can you do this?" It's like, "No, I can't."
No, doesn't work at all. Like
Yeah.
everything, and especially if you have an artist who's behind the whole thing, and everything from tip of the bill to the end of the tail is all part of this sort of math equation in their head, and everything's ratioed out. So you can't just start arbitrarily
Yeah.
changing things. I think they did a good job of bringing it back away from Donald Donald the Duck, right? I almost
Donald
said
Duck.
Daffy. I always get those two. Like I'm
Yeah.
dyslexic with my ducks. I can't help it.
There's
So
a lot of
adding a third
ducks.
one will help. I think just add balance.
Can
to
we
the
add
force.
Scrooge McDuck in there?
Oh yeah, of course. But I never get him confused with anybody. He's almost perfect.
He's his
as
own
ducks go.
duck.
He is very special as there are ducks. But everything from that little tuft of feather on the top of his head, I felt like his duck bill shape. I mean, there's a lot of good things to say about the final model that they produced, although seeing it in high def didn't help the
No,
situation.
It doesn't help. No.
Even for later on when you see the monster makeup on people, like you just can't unsee the boundaries between the rubber mask and the skin and things like that. So some of that wouldn't have been as apparent on VHS when I first saw this. But I mean, maybe in the theater though, you would have been able to pick up some of that.
Yeah. So I will also say that early on in the production, they decided that the personality of Howard's character would be changed from that of the comics, in which Howard was really rude and obnoxious. So they made the character a little bit nicer.
He's more charming.
Yeah. Gerber was consulted, apparently, although the stories sort of are different depending on where you read. Some places say he was consulted and other places say he wasn't consulted. So
Well, it sounds like his separation from the project initially
he
was
did
really
come
dark.
back. He did come back around though in later 80s and start working with Marvel again. So it's kind of a weird thing, even though there was that weird. It never actually proceeded into a full court case.
Artists,
They
am I
settled out
right?
of court.
I mean, come on.
So he was on set, supposedly he was on set for the last day of shooting, and the film opted for more emphasis on special effects as opposed to satire or story. Does that sound familiar at all? Like,
Yeah.
so they didn't really.
It didn't suit
And
him
as we'll
great.
get to as we start going through the movie, they really didn't get into any of the satire, the social commentary, which is sort of the core of what Howard's whole thing is about. But specifically, and this is a quote from this website that I'll post in my show notes. It says the script significantly altered the personality of the title character, played the story straight instead of as a satire, and removed the surrealist elements. They added supernatural elements that could highlight the special effects work done by Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic.
Yeah, ILM is stamped all over that thing.
Yeah.
Like and it's super fragmented. Like you see, if you watch a lot of his earlier work, you see different disciplines within ILM. Like it's not very well connected. So you suddenly have a special effect that feels like it's from a different movie or feels like a movie that you've seen before. And then it's almost like you had another division and they were in charge of that one. And so you see that next group come in. And so there is a little discontinuity between the special effects.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's a weird thing to complain about in 2021. This is pretty impressive work for the time that it came out.
Yeah. Well, so let's get into the movie a little bit. So it starts off with Howard getting sucked from his home planet from his perspective for no reason. He's just sitting in his apartment, relaxing after work, looking at a nudie magazine. And he gets sucked through a portal through space and lands weirdly
several bedrooms and a bathroom.
Sure. And then just sort of sucked up into what looks like a wormhole.
Can I just say that the texturing of those sets, the way that they did that, it was very jarring at first. I mean, I remember the first time I saw it, and then of course this
was it the duck boobs that got you?
Stop. Just stop taunting me with that horrifying imagery. But no, I feel like the way that they dressed each of the sets up was really thoughtful, and it sort of sets this idea when you start the movie out that you're in for a different movie. And I think we'll probably touch on this later, that the movie sort of seemed to continue to have an identity crisis from scene to scene, but I really do think that they spent a lot of time and care just putting together, like, it felt lived in, and it felt like this is a duck that has this is a
This is
duck
a
that has
duck that has
a whole life going on over here. It didn't quite gel with his career choices, later on that he describes, like in classic Macaulay Culkin fashion. You go back and watch the movie, and you look at their house, and you think, okay, how big was the mortgage on that place?
yeah.
But you ask that question, if he's in some major duck city, how much would an apartment of that quality cost?
Yeah. I don't know. Those are all good questions.
Well, we don't know what the exchange rate between duck bills and dollar bills
bills.
is. Yeah.
Wow.
That's duck tails. I know.
So he lands in this alley in Cleveland, like we've said. He gets brutalized by a few people in the process, and he's like kind of freaked
I wanted
out.
to ask you,
Yeah.
what was your impression? Okay, this is another weird, discordant scene. What do you think of their depiction of punk rockers and then the biker gang? I mean, it was like they squashed 8 movies into this, like, it was like American Graffiti moment of just like, here's the street life. And it felt really just over the top, and there were a lot of unnecessary bits where he gets thrown into an alley and now a homeless lady's screaming at him. But specifically the punk rockers and the bike.
It's a good question. So I kind of read that like, first of all, it feels very slapsticky Three Stooges-y,
yes.
and it also feels
you ready
like
for a crazy story?
and I feel like this is sort of the beginning of them really missing what Howard's appeal was to its original audience. It also felt like the boomer generation, who at that time were, younger than us. But them trying
Stop
to
again. You're just challenging me in ways that I'm not ready for today.
it was them kind of reading what modern kids and teenagers looked like to them. And so, as we know, that the boomers kind of have a very interesting take on Gen X and millennials sort of growing up stuff. So punk rock and, certainly the 80s interpretation of punk rock and all of those things, a lot of them sort of looked down on it quite a bit, which is interesting considering their musical taste, but whatever. I just think that it was sort of an adult's take on a kid's thing.
Yeah.
It was very weird.
And I felt bad that the punk rockers' only part was to be to like kind of molest, your main star. That was the only kind of punk rockery moment. There were some of them in the bar, but that was where they really did it up and just sort of made everybody look like Crocodile Dundee punk rocker kind of like just do that. Just do that thing they did over there in Crocodile Dundee. But yeah, that kind of sucked. And then of course it's weird that was the first moment where I was like, I don't think they are sure about their audience yet, because you have the earlier scene, which may have been shot later, thinking about having the duck built and how late it came, where you have a half nude duck, in a scene, right? But it's very graphic in terms of that. Like, it was kind of funny, like a kitschy kind of funny thing, but it was like, And then they go to like use a euphemism for some imaginary drug that somehow, I've done too much toot, and a lot of other podcasts I've heard make fun of that. I think the Film Sack podcast covered this years and years ago, and they all had a huge laugh over the fact that he said, I think I've done too much toot.
I've literally never heard it called that, but
I don't know what they're referring to, because he's implying that he's hallucinating a duck. And so I'm like, I just don't know.
That was a weird moment. It's again, there's a lot of things that really pull you out. And in this sequence, there's even a part where, and I can't remember if it's in this sequence or one of the next ones, but Howard literally breaks the fourth wall, looks right at the camera. And, you're like,
wait, what?
What is happening right now? Like, I don't know what to feel. So,
and in an interdimensional story, that almost kind of doesn't, I mean, it's not a problem to have a scene like that. But again,
it wouldn't be like if like Deadpool does it really successful, but I guess my point is,
you can't compare anything to Deadpool.
This is the very first Marvel movie.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it from the perspective of Marvel, and you're thinking about it like the weird, wacky Guardians of the Galaxy-esque Marvel Cinematic Universe that has now been established. No, we're getting there.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, like, they do very well all of this interdimensional, intergalaxy type of portals through space and all of that. And I feel like, Howard really is trying to reach to a place that no one has gone before. So I'm going to give the movie a whole lot of credit for, if they had just like on a mixing board, just mixed up and down certain things.
But
I
then left
feel
those settings
I feel like
consistent.
yes, consistently. I feel like this could have been, even with the special effects being what they were and the duck suit being what it was. I still think that there was
I don't
some
hate the duck
hope.
suit. I kept being impressed by
It's
the fact
impressive.
that he was successfully emoting at me through the TV screen, and then I would realize that that's a mask, or I realize that's an animatronic, prosthesis that's doing that.
Yeah, and it's so I'm gonna go ahead and keep moving on. So he hears Beverly, and I'm gonna pull up a shot of beautiful Leah Thompson with her amazing hair that is her real hair that took 2 hours for them to crimp her hair
I
into
thought
that
about that. That hair
insanity.
was insane.
It's really lovely though. It looks
I
just
normally pick on 80s crimped
outstanding.
hair, but I mean, if you want an example of when it's done right, that
Oh my
is a
God.
really good
She
example of that.
looks absolutely stunning.
And her performance as the lead member of that band, Cherry Bomb, was actually really believable.
Yeah.
She was probably really singing.
I can't say enough good stuff about her.
She's cool.
She's great. And
Why is she in this?
I've met her in person, like at DragonCon a few years back, and she is just a delightful person. She's so nice. I just love you. I love you, Leah Thompson. So yeah, he sort of sees her getting beaten up or about to get beaten up, and he jumps out, and
they give her a few good punches too.
And this is where I'm really going to point out that the wonderful score by I'm doing my name thing, John Barry.
Mm-hmm. I mean, who can forget the estimable John Barry and how jarring it was that he did this score?
John Barry.
I'm going to complain about that more a little later.
He has this, like, it's the love theme that comes in that plays for, like, when Howard and
could he have just had
Beverly,
maybe 2 or 3 love themes or other themes?
It's so syrupy sweet though, and Howard is there, and he's very dejected, and he's literally been, if you think about what's happening to him, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
He's an average dude like you or me. He's been sucked out of his house and thrown onto a planet billions of miles away, possibly, where he's the only one of his kind, and he has no way of getting home, and he doesn't know where he is. He has no money, he has no ability to eat, and he could just be murdered at any moment. It's very scary, but it's not being played that way. But then he saves this girl's life, and she's like really grateful, and she offers him a place to stay, and it's kind of like he's standing there like, she's like, well, do you have anywhere to go? Like, and it's playing this sad music, and you're like, it's kind of making me feel sorry for poor Howard.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, this is right after, like, very slapstick Three Stooges type comedy where he's being zapped around and thrown all around, and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. It got really Muppety right now.
There for a second.
Like it's just like start and stop with your emotions. It's I get having sort of a nice blend of a variety of different kinds of films all sort of mashed together, but you have to. I don't know. As an audience member, I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. I'm just really confused because you had the scene with the boobs on the duck, the female duck, as she's taking a bath, and Howard's chair is ripped through her taking a bubble bath.
That was so
her duck boobs are sitting there.
I had successfully removed that from my brain. I was so proud of myself. I realized I had successfully unseen something.
Yeah.
And now it's back.
And so
it's back.
You've got, like, you're just sitting there going, is this literally, you're very consciously thinking, is this for children? Is this for adults?
Well, the slapstick stuff you just talked about is perfect for kids.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of that stuff is taking something that would actually be terrifying and making it kind of funny and
which is a
comedic timing. And it's like, no, that's my girlfriend, when he brings the, I finally found a girlfriend for you, Joe, or whatever. And the guy, then they throw him out and he's like, but wait, she's with me. I mean, there's a lot of little funny things in there. And I had that weird moment just as dad. I was like, oh, this is rated PG. I wonder if I could watch the Nope.
Nope.
No.
Just a big nope on that.
That's a hard no.
But I think a lot of people at the time complained about that too, because they felt like, I don't really know what this is supposed to be. Is it a kid's movie? Is it a family movie? No, it's an adult movie, but it also doesn't feel very adult either. And, Gloria Katz sort of talks about it almost like, well, he's a duck from outer space, so it's wacky. And it's like, but this is where I'm going to say, I don't think that the people who are making the film, and I think that they really truly liked Howard, but I don't know if they completely plugged in, like you said, to what Howard's strength was, which was more of a satire and a biting cynicism as opposed to wacky.
But like you said, this is early days. This is Marvel's, first cinematic movie
Yeah.
in that way. You really have to expect them to. They're going to have to rely on existing writers. These are writers who have done work that's well regarded. That was the stable that would did it. That would do that, and they didn't have the writers that we have now. Like nowadays, it wouldn't be as weird to have Gerber be a bigger part of the writing team, and that would be more acceptable. But back then, trying to pitch that to a large corporation's board may have been too risky. They were, no, we're going to go with these two folks that we know can produce a solid script.
Yeah.
But then you have two folks who don't get the comic book and they don't get, they're like,
I think
okay,
think they get it.
but they're doing it from up here.
Yeah.
They're sitting at this level of movie writing. There was something about this movie that made me feel like they were reaching for the Zemeckis really hard.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And they couldn't join.
Well, it's that Back to the Future. It does feel very Back to the Future, which is interesting because Leah Thompson, of course,
not
just had the
because
success
of her, right?
Right, but as I'm watching it, I'm feeling so much empathy and so sorry for the actors in the movie.
She acted her heart out, and
because
you could
I'm
tell
like,
that
I'm
she
sitting
was
there
like,
thinking, like, are they on set looking at this duck costume and going, oh God, what have I gotten myself into? And feeling that nauseated feeling every day when they go home from work? Or are they thinking it's going to be successful? And what's going to, like, as you're watching it, you're transported back and going, as they were filming this, they had no idea, or did they, what was coming in terms of the critical reaction, which we'll get to. But so, all right, so he goes and stays with Beverly at her apartment. And so then she takes him the next day to meet Phil, who she says is a scientist, but he's actually only a research assistant.
I did love that fallout from the meeting.
And so he finds that out, Howard does, and he's like, you guys can't help me. I'm just stuck here, whatever, I give up.
And he ditches Beverly, right?
He ditches her and walks off. And then he goes to the unemployment office and tries to find a job. And
awesome
he
scene.
ends up working at a brothel?
Yeah.
An intimate spa?
Yes.
Apparently, and I have a screenshot of it up here on the screen, and on the back of his little work jacket, it says Hot Tub Fever is the name of where he works. So it's a really weird, Michael kept saying, what kind of an establishment is this?
Like,
and
what license did they apply for?
I don't
That's what
know,
I'm trying to figure out.
But it sucks. And so,
then you've got all these like below, like when you think of like how graphic some of the scenes in there were, which were far too graphic for a young audience.
Yes.
But at the same time, never went far enough to be rated R. The whole
Wouldn't
thing.
you just love to see them trying to rate this movie?
Oh my gosh, those people who sat around that table had to be just arguing back and forth. There's something a little discordian about it, how they just keep throwing different things in there.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of got that,
it just becomes
an adult thing that they're like, this is silly and wacky, but it's funny, it's a little dirty, but it's not.
I'm thinking of like Leisure Suit Larry.
It's
like
not
the
Meet
Sierra
the Feebles, okay, but it's, which those of you who've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, but it's
what you're greatly
it's getting close to, yeah, it's really so anyway, he hates it. There's literally a big mud tub.
I didn't get that either.
I don't understand.
But I did appreciate him kicking the manager into it.
That's right.
That was well done.
So he goes and he finds Beverly again, and he kicks her deadbeat manager's butt and gets the band Cherry Bomb their money.
Another weird slapstick fight scene.
And then they go back to her apartment, and there's this weird sort of almost love scene. And this is where I'm going to point out again that he looks a lot like Macaulay Culkin. Yeah. And he's wearing pajamas like a little kid would, which does not help the fact that he looks like a small child. Even Leah Thompson, because the actor who plays Howard the Duck, he was a little person, but then there was also a little boy who was like 11 or 12 who sometimes played Howard, because Howard was played by a number of different actors.
I noticed that just when I was watching it, when you did the behind the movie thing, it was like a 16-page list of Howard the Duck actors.
That's right. Well, so she was like,
Akbar.
I really didn't want to do this scene with a child.
No.
But she could have had to do it like with a child. They don't actually have an actual love scene, but there's the preamble to it. Like she's coming onto him really hard, and it's just very uncomfortable to me. Like it just felt not funny. It felt icky. Like,
yeah, I didn't want to be there.
Cringy.
I didn't want to have to be in the room while that was happening.
I remember feeling that way when I saw this movie the first time.
It's
super
very
cringy.
strange, and it made me wonder. And I know that Lucas didn't write this, but have we ever seen him make an actual romantic
Thing that
couple
wasn't cringy.
that wasn't super weird? Like, is this what love looks like to you, George? But I know that this was written by other people and other things. But I kept going back to like Star Wars, where it ends up being like a brother sister type dynamic.
Well,
Spoilers, sorry. Yeah, I mean, you can debate that because I don't think it initially started out that way.
it
But
didn't.
but ultimately, what it turns into, and that's the thing, a lot of his romantic scenes always turn into something kind of off-putting.
Well, Leah Thompson points out that, in Back to the Future, she's trying to get it on with her son. And then she
Yes,
goes to this movie where she's trying to get it on with a duck.
yes.
And it's just sort of like, she had just had this huge success, and then she goes to this movie obviously was a huge flop. And so it's like,
I think it netted $1 million more. I'm sure you're going to bring that up, but
yeah, well, those cost estimates are always notoriously hard to find real dollar amounts on,
and
but
about half of
they
it's marketing. There's
basically
a lot
broke
of
even.
yeah.
Like, but that's a failure from Hollywood's perspective. So anyway, they're kind of having this scene, and the lab assistant guy, who is played by Tim Robbins, right?
Such a weird moment.
He's such a wacky. Again, he's a very
He's
wacky
too good for this movie. He
character.
really is great in this.
This is one of his first roles, if not his first role, and he comes in and he's got and I'm gonna forget the actor's name, but
Andy Dufresne.
No,
I know.
the actor's name
I know,
who
I did
plays
that on purpose.
anyway, he's the guy from Ferris Bueller.
Jeffrey Jones.
Yes, thank you. I was like, it's the same syllable. It's just the same letter that is first and last name. So anyway, they all come in, three guys come in, and Jeffrey Jones and the other guy are both actual scientists. And apparently they had been doing an experiment the other night, which, Tim
Around
Robbins'
Cleveland.
character is like, this must be what brought Howard here, was this essentially this ray that they shoot up into space. I don't remember what they were trying to accomplish. And it accidentally did this. And so they were like, well, we can reverse the polarities and
where have we heard that before?
Sort of send you back. And so they go back. The idea is they go back to the lab. They're gonna switch the switches.
You get the red one out and you put it in the blue one. You get the blue one out and you put it in the red one.
And so there's a malfunction that then it does something where it, instead of it does sort of a similar thing but different, where it sucks this entity in. It's like
aimed at a different pocket right nearby.
Yeah. And it sucks in this thing called the Dark Overlord of the Universe, and it basically possesses Jeffrey Jones' character, whose name is Dr. Jennings. And so he goes from being, and I'll show you throughout the rest of the course of this film, he kind of goes from being himself to a very Ghostbusters-esque monster creature
with like a weird clawed thing that absorbs energy that comes out of his mouth.
It's very weird.
Well, and Tim pointed out before we were recording that some of the acting that he did here was hilarious. And I do have to say, working with that material and changing into that character, he managed to both be somebody that I would never want to be 30 feet close to.
No, yeah.
But at the same time, funny, like the way he interacted with scenes and the way he talked like that.
He did do a weird voice, and he really got into it.
Bad, and that made it better.
Right. Well, weird. He just like went for it. And which is what you have to do.
That's what Tom Hanks says. You got to go for it.
You just got to go for it.
Yeah. You got to go there. That's what he says.
So he escapes, Dr. Jennings escapes with Howard and Bev, who is Leah Thompson's character. And then they go on this crazy car chase. They get away from the lab people and the authorities who are now there to try to arrest
the Keystone
Howard.
Cops, who just don't seem to have a radio in their possession.
It's very wacky. Again, very, very wacky. Crazy car chase. They get to a diner, and there's a crazy diner scene.
Which, by the way, who is that? Who's the lady who played the waitress? I mentioned something about her. It was one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie is when she's trying to serve this weird family. And of course, I'm thinking, why would she just assume it's okay for a child that she thinks in a costume to have one of the 3 beers? Like they're like, 3 beers, please. There's the lovely bit where they bring the eggs, and Howard is genuinely mortified.
Yeah.
And they're all just sort of having their own different kinds of freakouts, and she's just rolling with it.
Yeah.
Like, she's just giving it back. And, her final line of that sequence, just being that, hostility is a psychic boomerang. And I was just thinking that is just, it's such a interesting, real character that was played very well, very transparently. You didn't
Yeah.
feel like she was acting. She wasn't trying to like do an affect. It was just kind of like you would imagine this sort of
Yeah.
post-punk kid working at a diner, just trying to deal with the weird people that come in at night. And I love the line later where she's like, "Oh, sweetie, we have fights in here all the time."
Yeah.
You know,
Which is weird because it looks like a Denny's. Like, it's like,
does.
it's like she's
But it's
acting like
played
it's
like
a
a biker
barroom
bar.
brawl, but it's like they're little kids sitting in there with their
Well,
parents having a hamburger.
And
Like,
let's not
it's
forget that it was like sushi, right? So it was, what was the first part of it? It was this juxtaposition of,
it's like four things all like slammed together.
and then they all have like Karate Kid, you know,
Well, yeah, because it's like a
Rising
sushi place
Sun
that's also
headbands
got
on.
Italian and I don't know. It's clearly, again, it's a joke.
But it's
Everything
too
is
much.
a very dialed up to 11 joke, and it's so
It's
much.
too many things in the cup of podcasts, is
But
all I'm saying. I couldn't
think
figure out.
that's what I think the film, the director, and the folks making this, I think that's what they think is funny about Howard.
So
The
is this like the
wackiness.
producers? This is a movie made for movie makers?
I'd like to really compare this movie to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Fair?
Because
Actually, yeah. That's
because like the comic was actually this really interesting commentary on comics.
and kind of noir.
And it was really violent, but it was like, you know, even the title and the construction of the characters was like making a play on what was happening within comics at that time, and discussing Daredevil and discussing all the cute little characters, but that they were like menacing, and you know, they were really sort of playing with that. So there's some commentary in there, but there was also action. And Howard, while he wasn't like, obviously he did actually have Quack Fu as a thing as part of his character in the comic, but I think moreover he was like, I'm, you know, I'm making these observations, and it was more of his witty repartee.
The closest we got to that was the museum scene where he was, you know, making jokes about us being hairless apes, and then
Which was definitely something Howard said all the time in the comics.
yeah, there was a lot more that felt closer to him in those scenes where he was, you know, he's like, "Are you reading my mind?" And he's like, "They're going to realize I'm a fake." You know, there was a lot of really good dialogue.
Yes. There were moments of just like you could see the character peeking out at you. And I feel like that's why even like Steve Gerber, who, whether or not he was actually, you know, when the movie first came out, he was like, yeah, I think they captured, you know, some of what Howard is. Now, he may have just been saying that because the movie was going to come out and his name is on the screen, you know, as created by.
He may have had some stake in it, like maybe
Could
some
be,
money on the line.
but I'm just,
they gave him a point or something.
I think there are elements of Howard. He's not completely divorced from like the way he kind of looked.
But he kind of has to peek out. He has to crack the little egg, and his little bill just has to come out. And then
how many duck puns can we do in the rest of this podcast?
I don't know.
Let's push it. So all right, they're in the diner. Things get weird. So Dr. Jennings is slowly turning into this dark overlord.
Yeah, his
by
tail
the
feathers
moment,
get really ruffled.
Just really like, you know, and he looks like this again. I'll show you the picture of what he turns into, but that's him sitting in the diner.
He reminds me of Men in Black when that guy inhabits the body.
That's right. It does kind of feel like that. And I wonder almost if they pulled from this a little bit.
Quite possibly.
And so he sort of slowly transforms into this very, very creepy looking thing. And he, you know, in the meantime, everyone in the diner is getting really spun up. And
like that family who doesn't decide to leave until there's literally a cart with a duck on it flying towards them, and they're like, "We gotta get out of here."
The rednecks come over and start harassing Howard, and they end up eventually sort of grabbing him by the neck and slamming him on a table, and they're going to chop him up and make him into sushi. And I'm like,
duck sushi? You know, we've heard about that. The duck sashimi is supposed to be really good at this diner in the middle of Cleveland.
That's right. So anyway, eventually Dr. Jennings, for whatever, I guess he takes Leah Thompson's character Beverly with him and leaves, and Howard, you know, barely escapes from all the people, but then he can't follow. And he's got the little card. Dr. Jennings has the little card that allows him to use that Howard had stolen. The code key to like get into the big, you know, cannon into space thing. So the thing is that
microscope
all of this sounds crazy, but it does actually, like, the script was written tightly enough that it kind of does. It's not too MacGuffin-y. It's not like The Last Jedi, right? Like it's it's a cohesive script in that sense. Maybe not tonally, or maybe not in terms of who the audience is supposed to be, but in terms of what's happening and why.
It's
The
tied
character
together.
motivations make sense. Everybody's doing things for a reason and all of that. So with an adventure action movie, that's all you can really hope for. And so he's taking her not because he's stealing the girl, but because he's going to bring in more of his Dark Overlord's characters from space,
Well, yeah,
and they're
they've
going
got
to
that
inhabit
line
her body.
where he says, you know, you're coming with me, and she's like, why? And he's like, because I need your body. And she's like, I've heard that before, mister. And he's like, no, I really need to take one of these overlords and stick it in your body.
Yeah,
And
because
she's
we
like,
can't
oh.
exist in this on this planet, so we have to basically ride around inside you as like a, you know, you're a host.
It's kind of awkward but funny.
Yeah. So anyway, he's gone off with her. Howard is hanging out, and who shows up but the cops at the diner, of course, because crazy stuff has happened.
Great
And
line
in the
right there.
back of the cop car is our friend Tim Robbins, who
he says, I know my rights. I want my baseball cap. And the cop doesn't give it to me. He's like, fascist. It's so funny.
And so somehow Howard breaks him out of the cop car, and
that's even great. Like Howard opens the door and Tim just goes out the front window.
He climbs out the front
like it's nothing.
It's very funny. Well, so they go around to the back of this diner, and for some reason there is an ultralight aircraft back there,
and it's daytime.
Suddenly. But it's suddenly daytime, but it was kind of nighttime. It is weird. It's jarring. What are you gonna do? And so they basically take this, and I'm going to show you kind of what this wackiness looks like. The two of them get into this ultralight, and they are going to use it to fly to the lab, because I guess they know that's where the Overlord is going to take Beverly to try to do whatever he's going to do to her. So they have to sort of make their way back to this lab. It's very, very wacky, and it feels very similar to
Blues Brothers.
The Phantom Menace is what I was going to say.
Wow.
With pod racing that just goes on and on and on.
Now listen, this is a loved scene by a lot of people.
I know.
Just the fun and all the different hijinks. But I too found my hand creeping towards the button that skips 10 seconds. And I'm like, nope, I can't do that for this one. I'm prepping for a show, and then it would be like, but I really want to just.
It's frustrating because the craft stays very low to the ground, and they just are sort of flying, and the cop cars are chasing them because obviously they see them.
So you have an airplane that's sticking to a road.
You go up high. And
they're shooting shotguns at it.
Right.
To some effect. You know, they could. It's apparently the ultra self-healing Millennium Falcon of ultralights. They're just like flipping switches and stuff, and it's like, I'm back in the air again.
It's a weird sort of series of scenes. It's really impressive when you think about it.
Yeah, whoever the stunt people were for that had to be just amazing.
And however they were filming it, those actors really did have to fly that ultralight aircraft.
No.
Yeah, and it was just the two of them up there.
Can you imagine the insurance on something? Of course, Tim Robbins is not the Tim Robbins we have post Shawshank Redemption, which was, of course, the sequel to Howard the Duck.
Someone
it's a
said
joke
that
I
earlier
stole from somebody earlier, but yeah, all I kept thinking, you know, when he walked into set was,
what are you doing with that duck?
Was a tall glass of water. And then he'd keep making those faces, you know, Tim Robbins being Tim Robbins.
Yeah.
I could really see, like, this guy's got something. He's going places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, it's impressive because apparently that took a really long time to shoot. And so
that came through.
They took a long time to watch too.
Yes, it did.
I mean, bless them. That looks like a very hard thing. It
was hard work. There's no doubt it was hard work.
Macaulay Culkin has never been so terrified as in this moment. Yeah.
And that's one of the wet bandits there behind him. Yeah. Just, you know, riding along on the ultralight, which of course has to be carefully balanced and weigh the correct amount before it can fly properly. They were very lucky that it held the weight of both that tall Andy Dufresne fella and a duck.
In the meantime, our friend Dr. Jennings has taken Beverly in a semi to go back to the lab, and that's a whole series of events that's sort of cutting back and forth.
That got foul.
It was pretty gross. And then good job. They get to the lab, and
You're just gonna skip the nuke plant? Just gonna skip skip the whole nuke
Yeah,
plant
go
thing?
ahead.
Okay, the only thing I have to say about the nuke plant is because of course I tie everything back to Chernobyl. When they filmed this,
I can't believe it.
they I think the only disaster that was like widespread and talked about when they were writing this would have been 3 Mile Island, and so they make a reference to that, being like, "There's no 3 Mile Island stuff." I loved how smarmy the nuclear power plant people were.
Yeah.
But aside from the fact that once they got into the plant, you're just like, that isn't what a reactor is. Like, okay, there's a door you can open it, just absorb energy, 2 million megavolts or whatever it happens to be. But it was kind of funny, and it was necessary to recharge the Overlord. So that's all I had for that particular scene, was just that it was awkward. Just the timing of it and everything. And of course, if you think about it, at that time, Chernobyl was kind of happening and still happening when the movie was actually put out.
Thank you for bringing down the room, Aaron.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah.
You can bill me for it later.
Okay, cool. So Howard, they get in there and she is strapped to this table, very like Bride of Frankenstein kind of thing, where she's there underneath this big apparatus that's aimed at the stars, and he's going to turn it back on and draw out all of these other dark overlords. And it calls into question, if he's the dark overlord of the universe, what are they the dark overlords of? But
I think he said he was one of.
Yeah, well, I think in the Marvel comics, and you comic guys out there can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think
you can just kind of feather that into the chat.
It's an actual character, but the name was changed, which was even more convoluted because it's a Marvel name. So it's almost like a George Lucas name, where it's absolutely wacky and hard to remember. So I'm not even going to try to remember it because I didn't write it down. But so they get in there, Tim Robbins and I keep calling him that because I can't remember his character's name.
I don't either.
Phil, I think. Phil and Howard are working together, and they find this neutron disintegrator. And
like one does.
So
I loved how it was like Defense Projects was a closet that had a lock on it.
Yeah, just a padlock.
And he was like, my friend showed me this, and he's like, oh, of course, this is where it is, and it just says Defense Projects or something. It was kind of funny. It was a nod to secret, military.
It literally feels like this movie slips toward like Hot Shots and Airplane and that level of
like overly
slapstick.
Labeled Garbage Pail Kids, where all the pipes have where all the poop is
coming
from.
Don't call me Shirley. Like, I felt like someone was about to make that kind of a joke, which I really dislike. It's unfortunate because I really think that I really think that they could do a Howard the movie now, and I'll get to that in a minute. But so they have this big showdown, and they have this big CGI monster, which was kind of where the Industrial Light and Magic sort of comes in. So here's the monster, and here's Howard.
You already saw some of this with the clearly painted on outlines where they had painted onto the film to do the light, when it was a very Star Trek sort of thing earlier when he's at the emissions tests, the smog check place, and he blows all of the cars up in front of them, and it shoots out horizontal to his eyes, and then it collapses back in before it goes forward. I thought that was a lot of energy depicted in that. But at the same time, it was not the same kind of effect as we saw for other things, and it was a little Ghostbusters-y. That's
the thing that it makes me feel like Ghostbusters 2, like not 2, but also because the way that they draw the energy streams really is reminiscent of the proton packs, and
yes,
at the end with
where the energy
Gozer
is not even trying to be properly attached to space-time. It's just sort of feels slightly
rotoscoped
off.
On
yeah,
there,
rotoscoped onto it.
So it's a kitschy, very 80s feeling
but thing. I did love the monster.
I thought the monster was cool.
It was really well done. It reminded me of the claymation stuff we saw earlier. And it was just very engaging. Like,
he was a real like they really built him. He was like a little
stop action
kind of
and
thing.
The effects when he was like blowing the other characters, Tim Robbins and Leah Thompson's characters, out of reality, and they were sort of fading.
Glittery.
That
Xanadu
glitter was one thing, but also the way that they made the characters kind of shake, like they were coming unstuck from reality.
Yes.
That was kind of scary. Like, it was a little bit like
it was effective. Ah! You owe me a Red Bull. Okay.
Well, I got one that hasn't been opened.
Okay. So anyway, Howard destroys the Dark Overlord. That's now obviously he's come out of Jennings' body, And so he doesn't have to kill. No one dies, which is nice. So, you know, Jennings, except for the Dark Overlord, I assume.
I wondered about the other ones because remember they
and
had
so
that
yeah,
moment.
well, so he has to make this choice then, right? Because the others, it's very much like in Doctor Who when all of the Daleks are coming like through the space-time continuum into our reality.
Doctor Who and Howard the Duck, they're just
Well, they're both a little
peers.
cheesy, let's be honest, but
one's more aware of it. I think.
True.
You can debate about
they're
which
very
one it
different
is.
tones, but nonetheless, you know, he has to make this decision, and this is sort of where he almost, again, hitting these beats, he almost has like this character moment of like his whole quest in this movie has been wanting to get home, right? And try to figure out what's he going to do, how's he going to get back home. And this is his method to get home is this big telescope looking thing.
Mm-hmm. That
And
clearly can't be rebuilt ever.
Right, well, whatever. But he shoots it. You know, she's like, "Don't do it, Howard. You'll never be able to get back home." And he's like, "Well, I can't."
Bye bye, Duck World.
Yeah. So he basically just makes the choice to basically sacrifice his own happiness for the safety of humanity. So making him a hero. And so, as cheesy as it all is, he is doing those things and meeting those requirements. So he destroys
he knows
the
that
telescope.
if he just goes back to Duck World, he'll never be able to live it down.
Wow. Kudos.
Thanks.
Somebody, are you like tick tick tick?
I've counted
tick,
I've
tick,
counted
tick.
some of them more than once though, so it's not really fair.
It's fine.
But I'm trying.
I have 0, so.
Well, I mean, you know, you keep ducking the obvious ones.
Oh my god, you're so good at this. So anyway, he destroys the telescope. They get sent, I guess, sucked back to wherever they came from, and I guess they have no other way of getting to Earth. And the Earth is saved. And then we cut to Cherry Bomb on stage for the last dramatic scene.
With the worst Cherry Bomb song in the whole movie.
Written by Thomas Dolby.
Going to be controversial because Thomas Dolby, and it's the theme. You know, it's Howard's theme.
So Howard gets up, you know, first she says, "I'd like to dedicate this song to our new manager." I'm like, no one has ever said that. No one has ever, ever said that in the history of bands, ever. But he's standing there sort of watching, and I don't remember why he ends up doing what he does, but he's backstage and he ends up getting on this thing and accidentally ends up on stage.
Oh, no, because Tim Robbins is doing this like part of the show, but countdown, and he's choreographing all the different effects, and he goes, "Howard, can you help me out by releasing that rope?" And Howard reaches up, he goes, "Yeah, I got you." And he pulls it, and Tim goes, "Not that one." And it happens to be the thing that causes the thing Howard is standing on to go up into the air over the stage and then come down onto the stage.
Just
right behind Leah Thompson's character. Right. And they have a duck-sized guitar.
They do, which apparently Dolby built special for Ed Gale, who is the little person who did the majority of the Howard.
Well, I hope Ed got to keep that guitar.
He did.
Oh, that's amazing.
He still has it.
Have a guitar made for you special by Thomas Dolby. That's just like worth the
And
whole
I think
movie.
Leah Thompson, at least for a long time, had her, she may still have it, her red guitar from that
cool.
scene as well.
It's sort of like the Hobbits talking about still having their hero weapons from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's just, you need to have something.
But different, because
no, it's exactly the same.
Don't compare this movie to Lord of the Rings.
No, it's exactly the same.
You're right. So it's the soundtrack. So that leads nicely into the soundtrack. So first of all, the score we talked about was done by John Barry, and it was so funny because Aaron watched the movie, and as he was watching it, he was texting me.
It's kind of like live tweeting it.
He was, and he was like, "Oh my god!" And they're just straight ripping off the James Bond theme, and
yeah,
it's so
I hadn't
funny
looked at the wiki article or anything yet. I was just experiencing the movie, and I was like, "Oh, when they steal James Bond's music," and she's like, "Yeah."
It's
John Barry wrote it.
And Michael, well, it's funny because when Michael and I were watching it, he was barely paying attention.
But
he heard it, he was like, "That's the Bond theme." And,
yes.
And then I was like, "Well, I think that it's the Bond guy." And he was like, he looks it up and he's like, "Oh yeah, it is."
But why? Why would you ever think it was okay to, I mean, the funny thing about it is the scene where they apply the Bond kind of like brassy crescendo.
It's kind of a like
it is, and in that moment they're in the science experiment hall and there's this huge machinery. It looks like something a Bond villain would actually be displaying. Exactly, yeah. And there's
expect you to die, Mr. Duck.
There are little electric cars and people with helmets on kind of going and scooting around in the background, and if you just kind of squinted and didn't see this little duck person over there, you could totally expect to see one of the James Bonds just go walking into the room.
Agreed. Well, yeah, and they actually filmed it in that observatory out there,
Yeah.
and they built that whole thing. Apparently, it was very, very cold in that room, and
What, the
Leah,
famous California, the LA
I
observatory?
think so.
Yeah, that'd be most overused film location
And
of all time.
she apparently Leah Thompson in all those scenes where she strapped into that table was really sick, had a cold or something, and she was like, it was absolutely miserable because it was so cold in there. And she was
So
like,
when she said, "Get me out of here," she wasn't
she
kidding.
wasn't kidding.
She
She
spent
also
a lot of time in duress.
She also talked about the scene in the diner where it eventually climaxes when they're sitting at the table there's a mustard and ketchup bottle sitting there, and they're and they eventually explode, and they had like this weird blend of like physical effects, like with squibs all over the place, and they also had like some like
ILM
special
stuff.
effects
Well, yeah,
like
when he shoots the beam out of his eyes.
And so their stuff is just blowing up all over the place, but that because it's an actual practical effect, like you don't always control, like you have a little air thing that shoots underneath a plate and it makes it pop up, but you have no control over where gravity's going to take that. So they had to shoot that so many times, and they apparently shot all of those scenes like over and over and over again from like all these different points of view. And one time they did it from the perspective of the ketchup bottle and the mustard, and she was like, oh my God, I can't do this again, because she's having to act shocked over and over and over again. So she noted how difficult that particular scene was. So you had people involved with the obviously Thomas Dolby, we already talked about. He wrote a lot of the songs in the film. He actually chose a lot of the members for Cherry Bomb.
The Cherry Bomb stuff was great. Like,
and he worked with them directly, like to choreograph all their moves so that they looked legit.
They really did. I was watching the drummer, and the drummer seemed very naturally to be playing the correct, rhythms and beats and everything. Not that I'm an expert at drumming, but that's something that's easy to pick out in a movie. If a drummer's just like, doing this the whole time, just wildly flailing.
This isn't how we play drums at all.
Just stiff arming it. But even the songs themselves, like I was ready to sort of pick on, and I was like, I'd replay these. I'd listen to them unironically on their own. They're actually pretty
I feel
good.
Like there are several, maybe not that last one, but
they're a little poppy, but
they're pretty poppy.
But it's Thomas Dolby. But
yeah,
the hooks in them were like more solid than they had any right to be.
Yeah.
Even if the lyrics to the verses and everything were still a little bit glycerin. No, I'm not considering that in this equation. Again, that's another scene where I successfully reached for the skip 5 seconds button a few times just to like.
So that last sequence, when Cherry Bomb is performing, they're in front of a live audience at the Warfield, and
you can see packed. You can see the film grain change when they go to the credits.
You can literally see that it's not like now where you can just fake CGI people back there. That place was packed with people. It was impressive. Like seeing that many people in the audience was like, wow. And
that's because we've been living in our basements for over a year.
Well, that's true too. The song was also co-written by George Clinton, which is interesting. And then they've had a bunch of different releases, a huge release with like all these discs of the score and the soundtrack and everything, which is kind of impressive for this movie.
It's a favorite. A lot of people really like this in a kind of culty, fun way.
I can see why. I mean, I definitely was going in thinking it was going to be awful, but I honestly felt mostly just like kind of sad for the people who worked so hard at it. Like, I know that doesn't necessarily excuse its shortcomings, but I think it has some qualities in it that make it worth watching anyway.
Like, there are a couple of points where if it had stayed on the track it was on, it would be different. It would be a different story now, and they made some weird turns along the way. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's parts of this movie that almost lend itself to sort of Rocky Horror Picture Show love, where people will have, different products to throw at the screen. Like, I feel like there's interactive things that can happen along with it. And there may be, I don't know, but there may be, people who kind of see it in a similar category.
Yeah. Well, so obviously, as you would expect, it won a whole lot of Golden Raspberry. It won 7 Golden Raspberry nominations in '87, including Worst Supporting Actor for Tim Robbins, Worst Director, Worst Original Song, which was Howard the Duck. It won 4 trophies for Worst Screenplay, Worst New Star, as in the 6 guys and gals that were in the duck suit, Worst Visual Effects, and Worst Picture. And it also won a Stinker's Bad Movie Award for Worst Picture. So a
So
lot of
where do you
people
think
really
Garbage
panned
Pail
it.
Kids and
I feel a lot of people do put it on the same level with Garbage Pail Kids.
really
Yeah, and I don't think that's fair because I feel like this movie is a whole lot more
it's better wrought.
cohesive, like in terms of just
The
the nuts
material it
and
was cut
bolts of a
from,
film, whereas Garbage Pail Kids is barely a film because it doesn't even have a cohesive story. This has a very cohesive story. It's just
mhm.
the implementation where it stumbles a little bit.
You
And
know where one of the biggest fallout from this is not fallout, but the biggest drawbacks to this film is, and I think it was so distracting I couldn't stop having to fight with it, was the ADR, the re-recording of the audio. It was
yeah,
poorly timed. It was
yeah,
poorly directed, you know, meaning that it was the original actors who did it, but they just didn't seem to be in the same headspace as they were in the shot. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that most movies that we watch, they don't use the audio on stage. Even in movies like Lord of the Rings, what you're hearing is actually all of those actors in a studio who are reproducing that
yeah.
moment for this kind, well, better than, you know, what we have, but for, you
No,
know,
it's exactly like this.
yeah, we actually bought this from Weta Workshop. I'm just kidding. That's not true. But they're doing that. And in this movie, there are some scenes where, you know, at various times it's a little closer, but it was almost never exactly right. Even to the point where I made that recording that I sent over to you where the cop was just like, I don't know if we still have it, but where the cop was just like, it's a dangerous duck. He's got a gun. Consider him dangerous. Like it was just the guy read it like a news piece on the radio.
Yeah, it's very weird.
And I was just going, what? And then he turned around and he didn't look like the kind of person that had that voice. It was clearly a different voice actor doing the bit. So, but to me, that was one of the most difficult things to overcome to enjoy the movie was just how poorly timed and out of sync with the movie that part
I
was.
feel like for me, it was a combination of just the jarring tonal shifts. Because one minute it's like strings swell and it's very emotional and like,
I just wanted more of
and
that
then the
John
next
Barry
minute
Bond
it's
stuff.
like, like it's just very jarring. There's no like, it you go from feeling irritated because like that kind of stuff irritates me. I hate slapstick comedy to being like, oh, poor Howard to, oh my God, that's really creepy looking to, it's just, it doesn't really seem like it knows what it wants to be. And so I don't know how to feel as the
I
audience. I'm
think
just
they
sitting
had
there
to
going, I
rush
don't,
it. They didn't have time to
they definitely
really
had to rush
ruminate
it.
on it. I think if they'd had another year or two to sort of edit and
I think
reshoot,
if it had been animated, it would have been absolutely outstanding.
yeah, and if they'd had just more time to edit and reshoot
Of
on
course, it
this
could have
one,
felt like Looney Tunes too.
it
So
would have been more like Roger Rabbit, I
that's
think.
unfortunate. So
There's
there've
there's
been,
a web of things that they could
oh,
have
stop
done
it.
to improve this,
Stop.
I think. But you know, we just have to kind of paddle through what we can.
So there have been to date 5 releases of this film. I guess sort of 6. So it was released on VHS and Laserdisc back in January of '87.
Whatever happened to the laser disc?
And then it was released on DVD in 2003, and then a special edition DVD in 2009.
And of course, I watched it on Amazon Prime.
It came out on Blu-ray in 2016, and then there was a collector's edition Blu-ray, which is what we have on, I think, on April of 2019. So
That's
no, I
pretty
guess we have
recent.
the regular Blu-ray. So we don't have the collector's edition. And then this July, just in time for Iconicon, everybody, they're coming out, believe it or not, with a 4K of Howard the Duck.
That is going to be interesting.
I
I think
mean,
you'll be able to
'cause
see and you could tell they really tried to
you'll be able
feather
to
this
see
in
the actor inside that duck
like
costume.
an X-ray. No, but you can start to see the line where the feathers and everything didn't quite line up.
Yeah.
Like if you really look for it, it's like a makeup line where they didn't blend or something. And
Well, they also have multiple costumes and different actors who were different heights and different costumes
well, I
that
feel
were
like
different. And it was
like with clay animation, they had different mouths and things. So they would change parts out to achieve. They really achieved something great with the animatronic face. It was very emotive. It was very expressive. But to achieve that, they would have had to have had several different configurations of everything. There would be a bill that wouldn't move, and there'd be one that would move, and things like that.
this duck suit apparently was very, very difficult to get in and out of, and so the actor was essentially trapped in it for the entire shooting day. And so whenever he would take breaks, he couldn't really go to the bathroom. He couldn't really eat or do anything. And it was very hot. And so he was basically just trapped inside this duck costume, and they would sort of get a little chair. And this is a screenshot of him sort of sitting in the little chair trying to cool down and relax. And they're probably working on the animatronics because that was animatronically controlled for the mask, much like Chucky was in that film series. So, little trivia about some behind the scenes stuff. Apparently, of course, George Lucas had sort of stepped back after Return of the Jedi around 1984. He had just built his enormous Skywalker Ranch, which I'll put on the screen here. Skywalker Ranch complex, and he was really counting on Howard the Duck to get him back in the black. And so when it bombed, he had to start selling off assets so that he could stay afloat because he had sunk all this money into this enormous house that he and complex really that he's there. So his friend Steve Jobs offered to help him out by buying this newly launched CGI animation division, which we all know now as Pixar.
Yep.
Which was at a price well above market value. And so Lucas agreed because he was so desperate for the money, and that led to Pixar sort of becoming Pixar.
So we can kind of thank Howard Duck's, Howard the Duck's failure in the box office, for the events leading up to having Pixar.
That's right.
And by its influence, Frozen.
You're welcome.
1 and 2, which are forever burned into my brain.
That's right.
It's amazing, and I like it so much.
Apparently, another couple of weird little pieces of trivia that I came across. I don't know if these are true, but they're funny nonetheless.
If they're from IMDb, you gotta ask questions.
Following a test screening, supposedly, allegedly, Universal executives, a couple of them were arguing about who was to blame for greenlighting the film, and it led to a fist fight.
I would like that to be true.
Yeah, it feels like it could be true.
Can you imagine how weird a fist fight between Hollywood executives would end up looking?
Yeah. And then sadly, Willard Huyck never directed another film after
really?
this. Yeah. It was rough for a lot of the actors that were in it. They talked about how upsetting it was to read the press about, how, they're blamed for the bad acting and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know if any of that's really a fair criticism.
No, it's not. And it definitely made me not want to go too hard on any criticisms I had for it.
Yeah.
Like, try to keep them in a very technical sense. But I mean, there are times where I'm just like, why is it like this? But I feel like everybody involved in this has experienced a great deal of ups and downs related to this film. And you look at, especially Leah Thompson's performance in it, which is good, but some of the direction I think she was given was odd. Like, the way that she reacted to things didn't seem always to be what I would expect her character to have reacted.
And you got to remember, she's a young actor. Like, this is...
So she's probably more likely to just be like, okay, I'll try that, and then do the scene. But I'm thinking of when they have their big breakup at the fountain. There's some bits where she's interacting with Howard, and I'm just like, that doesn't seem even with her character as the lead singer of a pretty cool band, for her to be acting that childlike or naive about certain things. So it was really weird.
It is weird.
But she's given us other performances where you're like, oh yeah, that actress is on point. But
so where does Howard go in the future is the last bit of this. And so Marvel supposedly back in 2019 was working with, I read, both Netflix and Hulu to create a Howard the Duck series, which has now been canceled. Here's a little mock-up of what that would have looked like.
You can tell they wanted to, because you pushed, you were like, wait, we're getting to that.
Well, it says it was going to do an interconnected animated franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going to have several shows that did this. So along with Marvel's, is it Tigra and Dazzler, Hit Monkey, and MODOK, they were going to have Howard the Duck. And it's an animated series that would be the fourth piece in a comedic crossover that would create Marvel's The Offenders.
Oh, so they had the Defenders, they had the Avengers, and they were going to do the Offenders.
Correct. But that has been
So
canceled.
so you do have the notes about Guardians of the Galaxy, right?
And
Like
that's the next slide.
okay, you're doing the thing where you just won't let me talk, where you just won't
No,
let
I'm
me say
not.
the
I'm
thing.
just saying that's what we're talking about. So
All
go.
right. No, it's not as interesting now. I'm just joking. But yeah, there's a lot
I
of people.
didn't mean to foul up, Aaron.
Nice. No, I was just kind of the reason that I think that it's that they had plans to do more with Howard the Duck was the fact that they included him in both the Guardians movies,
As
and
well as in Avengers Endgame,
yeah,
which
and
I have on the
the
screen.
collector had him in the big tube and other things, and it was a weird Easter egg to find nested in those scenes.
Oh my god!
Because there was a great big pond of things they could have done there, but it just turns out that it was flightless and they weren't able to do anything with it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I did read at one point that James Gunn was going to direct a Howard movie, but then I can't find when I
And
put it
James
in the
Gunn
Google
ran
machine.
afoul of their
He
machine
He
too.
did.
So that could have also influenced that.
Right, but
And he
I don't
would have
know.
been a decent choice for that.
I feel like Howard, the groundwork right now is definitely laid, and I think, I asked my friend Mike Alonso, like, what did you think of the Howard movie? Did you like back in '86? Did you think it was as terrible? He said, "Well, I think they got some parts of Howard right," and that's actually what Steve Gerber said. Although he said he thought that they missed a lot of the big broad strokes. I think now that's what you see when you look back on it. If you know anything about the comic, you're like, wow, they could have taken a slightly different direction and made it feel a little more like, almost like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit or even Cool World, where it had an edgier adult tone instead of a.
They pulled some punches.
They did,
they
and it's unfortunate. And so, anyway, I think Seth Green's sort of gravelly voice that he did for Howard in those post credits shots in the Guardians movie. I think they're really nailing the essence of Howard a lot better now because the technology has finally caught up with where it needs to be able to do a Howard type of thing. And I honestly, maybe they're waiting for it to just get a little bit better so that they can fully have him walking around and doing
because
whatever.
Nowadays when you have an actor who's doing something like that, I mean, think about what Iron Man would have been like if it was filmed back then. He would have been stuck in this giant tin costume, not able to go to the bathroom. The same old story we hear from Garbage Pail Kids to Howard the Duck at any time they have somebody in one of those really elaborate suits. Now, when you see behind the scenes footage, you see a lot of the actors are just wearing like bodysuits that are carefully gridded out with all these computerized sort of symbols. And then later on, a computer is actually mapping all the different parts of a 3D model of their costume onto them, photorealistically ray tracing those things, and then producing what looks like a Robert Downey Jr. wearing an Iron Man costume, when in reality he's basically just wearing a spandex, form-fitting body condom, if you will, that just has all of that stuff, sort of painted on it.
Mm-hmm.
So with Howard the Duck, you could still have, a little person who is doing the acting, but he would just end up like Rocket Raccoon would be another example of how, yes, they absolutely could do something like that.
Yeah, I would actually. I mean, I would love to see Rocket Raccoon in anything. So
can you imagine Rocket Raccoon and Howard the Duck sort of teaming up for like a buddy cop crime kind of spree?
That would be
not a heist. It would
amazing,
have to be a crime
because
spree.
they're both cantankerous and grumpy. The only thing is, I don't know that Howard is as much of a warrior as Rocket. He's sort of just more, things just sort of happen around him, and then he's sort of just ironically observing them verbally. Although I know he does do the quack foo thing, and he
disintegrated
he
an
takes care of
overlord
stuff
of
when
the
he has
universe.
to. I get it.
That is something that I don't know many people who can say they did that.
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, well now I know too.
You're welcome. By the way,
I'll say thank you after you welcome
me. So any other thoughts on Howard the Duck?
I was cautioned before we did this to like don't do anything to the Howard the Duck. And then in watching this movie, I felt like, I'm gonna have to do some be rough on this movie. And then of course letting it sink in and then thinking about all the parts it was made out of, like with many things that we talk about, it sort of turned into this bigger thing that leads off in several directions. So you have these ties into how we ended up with Pixar. It is always interesting. The only other thought I have to add is it's very interesting how many of these things that we considered flops or failures back in the 80s and mid 80s turned into the inspiration for or the reason why some other thing was made that ended up becoming this huge thing that we all have now.
Yeah.
And I think right now, in the way that we're producing movies, there seems to be a lot of emphasis on major motion pictures, major corporate productions, and huge properties. And I'm just not seeing, and maybe this is something Netflix and Amazon Prime are doing better, and it's just sort of stealthing in. But I'm not seeing those small projects that are being allowed to sort of fail or flourish on their own as much because they're just not getting the press.
Right.
So I wonder, I'm just trying to imagine now, here I am sitting here, what are the things that we'll be talking about in 30, 40 years that sort of led to the big thing that's happening then?
Yeah. Well, so that is Howard the Duck. And now I'm going to switch over and look at some of our super chats and just other chats that have been sent throughout. I just have a few of them here. So Scott, thank you very much for the super chat. And Scott says, this is where I usually say this movie gets a bad rap. It's not so awful. It deserves a fresh look. I can't say that here. This thing is a dumpster fire. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, but it smells like flowers.
It does. Smells an awful lot like flowers. Vinkman says, Aaron, the errandest Aaron that ever errand, was minding his own business when an angry duck came out of nowhere and started chasing him. As he ran down the street, he yelled, "Go duck yourself, you ducking ducky duck."
That's a risky thing to try to reproduce.
It really is.
I'm impressed by your ability.
Jason Anderson says, ma'am, what kind of head did the guy who owned the helmet Howard used have?
Just a normal humankind. Yeah. Probably a nose, 2 eyes, and a mouth. But pretty standard.
Yeah, but it's just, I think it's...
would have had
the animatronics that, because, think about it, like you've got all these wires coming down out of that thing. The eyes and everything are all animatronic. And
Howard had a different size, proportioned head to what he had in the comics, but it had to look okay next to Leah's head, especially when they did this sort of that weird love scene, where she was really close to him. I mean, it would have all had to be that way. And it was very weird when they showed more of a torso shot of him with his arms where he's like, be gentle. The proportions seemed weird to the way that he looked when he was just wearing clothes. Like he seemed very small and Donald Ducky in that moment. But other times he does seem to have a little more, mass to him.
Gloop Tracker says, people today brag about being in the audience for the Blues Brothers concert at the end of the movie. Does anyone brag about being an extra in the concert in this movie?
What if it was the same people?
What if it was?
Do we have any way to prove or disprove this?
We don't, but I do.
It was not. There's no way mathematically that it would be the same people. But you're right. I don't hear people who are like, hey, everybody's bragging about like being at a Woodstock, and someone's like, well, I was at the Blues Brothers concert, and someone's like, well, I saw Hendrix, and then that other person's like, well, I saw Howard the Duck.
Wicked Person says, fundy home with no movies allowed. So as a teen, I read the novelization of Howard the Duck. Wow.
Was that much better? I was in kind of a fundy home too, and I was shocked. I think one of the first things I live tweeted to Melinda while we were doing this was, oh my gosh, I was like 10 when I saw this movie. Like, how on earth? Because it was right after the whole like the fold out and then the bathtub scene, and I was just thinking, wow, this is weird. And then of course the sort of love shack thing that they have going on later, that's another scene where you just wouldn't have said this is a kids movie. But yes, of course, Sunday school class, please watch this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike O'Neill says, I love this movie. It's not good, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll agree.
I definitely think there are parts of it that are great, and it's like you start to see like, oh, this could have actually worked. Like once
it really could have.
You take that first initial reaction to the duck costume, and you're like, oh god,
it fades. You stop seeing it.
You stop seeing it, but the problem, like I said before, is really the tone. To me, that's the problem with the movie. So, Draws says, apparently Activision / Blizzard is the publisher to Howard the Duck video game. Ever play a Howard the Duck video game there, Aaron?
No, I kind of gave up on Blizzard stuff after Activision bought them for much the same reason that Michael's given up on Disney, or on, Lucasfilms once Disney kind of had it. It was just, I saw that as being cool, now it's owned by people who are primarily around a boardroom table instead of, and Blizzard was famous for, like, I think Lucasfilm was, as being sort of, just in the trenches. And these are people who are, don't have all the means, but, kind of did eventually, but they're still being very experimental, taking risks and being creative and sort of, middle fingering the rest of the establishment. Like, yeah, we're going to do a weird movie and it's going to be this way. And so you end up with the new Star Wars stuff. And then Blizzard several years ago got purchased by them. So I don't know. It really depends on if it was the Blizzard, I think East, back before they were bought by Activision. They really had a good
Are you
handle.
being a video game snob?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
They definitely had a really good handle on how to make kind of organic, crunchy, good feeling games. And then after Activision, you got Mists of Pandaria. And many people like me said, I can't take it. I'm out. I'm done. And they made that sound. They all made that sound at the same time, and it shook the world.
You got to. So, the last comment I'll read is from Mike, and he says, I'd pay big money to see a concert with Cherry Bomb and Sexy Sax Man from the Lost Boys. I agree.
We'd go with you. I would love to see Cherry Bomb. I
still believe. Anyway. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to us talk about Howard the Duck.
Yeah, that's great. This is I like this new format of doing this on our off Saturdays to get back on schedule doing these things. I really enjoyed that.
I did too.
And earlier in the day too. I have not eaten 16 pounds of Mexican food and don't have the lethargy. But we're about to.
Now we will reward ourselves with 400 pounds of candy after we eat 400 pounds of Mexican food.
I ate too many pizza. Invader Zim reference.
So, yeah, we will see you guys next week on the regular live stream. And we look forward to also seeing you in July for Iconicon. We've got some really cool stuff in mind. We're going to be watching some more terrible movies.
That's menacing.
Terrible
that's a menacing
movies, Aaron.
gesture.
I have so much.
Yeah, that's cool.
What sights you will see, Aaron.
If this is any indication, I'm going to need therapy. We're done with this.
So anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Time to turn the page.